Thanks for joining me in this video about Skyrim with Requiem. And in 3.3, the Requiem developers said they were giving a significant buff to the armor rating of late game enemies, particularly including Dragon Priests, so I thought it might be interesting to do a comparison of what they're like before and after that change. I'm hoping this video will have two purposes. First, for veterans who are familiar with both versions of Requiem, you can see how significant of a change it made. And second, maybe if you're a little bit newer to the series or having trouble with these fights, I'll be going over a number of the different Dragon Priest fights that you can encounter in Skyrim with Requiem, and you can get a sense for how you might want to prepare as a melee character. As you can see in 3.1, it was pretty easy to chop down this Dragon Priest just using a tempered weapon with no enchantments on it. In 3.3, I'm on a different character. I decided to make a two-hand barbarian, which I intended to be just as overpowered as possible using whatever buffs I could to tackle late game content. So here's the first Dragon Priest I fought using the Ebony Warhammer, which, realizing that Warhammers have a penalty against undead, but I had been able to clear all the high-level Draugr leading up to this without any significant damage issues, so I decided I would just give it a try against this first Dragon Priest as well. And it is not terribly successful. As you can see, my damage is just not really making very big of a dent, and if I just miss a swing here or there, then he's able to out-heal the damage that I'm doing. Early on, I tried to just ignore the Draugr that are in this fight. I just wanted to focus down the Dragon Priest, but then I realized I'm not going to be able to do that, so I start taking out the Draugr as well. I've got pretty high health and stamina regeneration, but I'm still taking enough damage that I need to heal a little bit. And after taking down the Draugr, I start trying to focus down the Dragon Priest boss again, who has unfortunately healed back up to full. And at this point I can tell my weapon just isn't doing any significant damage to him. And so I decide, well, first to loot the chest, just in case there's something there that would help. But then I get my healing going. Combat reflexes is very strong for these fights, even though it doesn't directly increase your damage. It makes it a bit easier to dodge, as well as get more hits in a sequence. And then I go after the boss again, still stubbornly trying to make the Ebony Warhammer work. And I can see that I'm starting to make a little bit of progress, but again, as soon as I miss a swing, he's healed back up nearly to full. So at that point I decide I'll switch over to Volsung, which I believe is treated as having a Daedric base, so it should have a little bit better damage or less penalty than just a straight Ebony Warhammer, and I can immediately see the difference that is doing. And so I just start chaining together power attacks and stunning the Dragon Priest so that it can't cast as many spells, more combat reflexes, and I can back him into a corner. And after a lot more hits, I'm able to eventually take him down. But as you can see, it's still not a very fast process, even though this weapon is more than capable of one-shotting high-level Draugr Deathlords and stuff like that. It's making progress, but not terribly fast against the Dragon Priest. Next fight is against Otar the Mad, which is nice to get an apples-to-apples comparison because it's the same one that I did in 3.1. And right away I can see that Volsung is doing a lot less damage than it was previously, and I decided to just skip the Ebony Warhammer because it was pretty obvious that wasn't going to work. And after getting combat reflexes up, I'm able to get a sequence of pretty good hits in on this guy. And it looks like things are going pretty well here at the start. And one concern I'm having is that him draining down my magicka is going to cause my shadow shield buff to run out. and if that happens, it'll decrease my damage pretty heavily. And then I miss one or two swings here, and then it suddenly starts going a lot worse for me. My health is trickling down pretty quickly. And all of a sudden, he's healed most of the way back up to full. And at this point, my stamina has run out, and I'm basically sure that I've lost this fight. So I decided to try it again, but instead of having Warhammer, I go in with the silver sword enchanted with fire instead. And it has considerably lower base damage just looking at it in the inventory, but as you can see, it's doing a lot more than I was with the Warhammer, and it also has lower stamina drain. So this fight is immediately going a lot better, and I'm able to chop down Otar and win the fight pretty fast, although it's still quite a bit slower than it was in 3.1, where he barely even got a chance to move. So this is one where you can really tell the difference that the patch in 3.3 has made. Next fight is against Hevnoraak. For this one, I decided to try out a silver quarterstaff of fire because I have the Warhammer perks, which give me another 90 expertise when using a two-handed blunt weapon, and I had heard, anyway, that you don't get the Warhammer penalty when using a silver Warhammer against undead. So while the quarterstaff has lower base damage than either the sword or my other two-handed weapons, I was hoping that that would offset it somewhat, but as you can see, I'm not even doing enough damage to overcome his rate of healing. So the silver quarterstaff of fire, at least in this fight, is pretty much totally ineffective, and I realized this pretty fast and switched back over to Volsung in hopes that just pure physical damage will be enough to get through him. And I'm pretty sure that the silver sword would be the better choice here, but I'm hoping that I can do it with just straight up physical damage, because that is where my perks are focused. And you can see the damage that that does, being able to just two-shot the Storm Atronach, but it's still doing very little against the Dragon Priest. And I'm still not really able to overcome his rate of health regeneration. And I decided to give Marked for Death a try to make my physical damage a little bit more effective. And you can definitely tell the difference that that makes, even with just the one soul into Marked for Death. I'm suddenly able to actually do enough damage to have his health start ticking down instead of staying even. But around this time, I've run out of magicka and my stamina is really low from both using several different weapons plus combat reflexes, and so I realize I'm not really going to be able to win this fight. And yeah, as you can see, my health is just, even in spite of having some healing potions, I run out of health before he does. This time I decided to go in right away using Marked for Death, because that seemed like it was working. And I'm able to rush him down pretty fast with Volsung. But for some reason, after the fight has gone on for a little while, he seems to be regenerating health more quickly than he was before, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. And suddenly my damage is not looking as good as I had hoped it would be going in from the start. So realizing that isn't working, I decided to go back to the Silver Greatsword, which I know, even though it doesn't have the perks in it, was pretty effective in the previous fight, and that ends up being what I need in order to win this one. So the unfortunate conclusion I'm getting at this point is that the sword is more effective, even though I don't have any perks in it whatsoever, versus having several perks into Warhammers, but that does appear to be what I'm seeing as these fights go on. Against Vokun, I wanted to try out the Ebony Warhammer again, just to see if there was any significant difference depending on which Dragon Priest I was fighting. And it ends up being still not very effective, and I go back to Volendrung pretty quickly. But unlike the previous fight, it appears to be doing just not very much damage at all against this guy, which leads me to believe that there are varying levels of physical resistance depending on which Dragon Priest that you're fighting. And so seeing the kind of poor damage there, I decided to try out the Silver Quarterstaff of Fire again. And while that does have lower base damage, it has quite a bit better swing speed. And while Vokun is kind of slippery and manages to dodge around a couple of my attacks, I eventually back him into this corner over here because the fire damage he's doing isn't hurting me very much. I'm able to out-regenerate it pretty easily with just some health potions. And because of the higher swing speed on the quarterstaff, I'm able to basically stun lock him in this corner where he can't get away and can't do anything terribly damaging to me. So then the fight ends pretty quickly after that. Last fight is against Volsung, who actually gives me more trouble than any of the ones I had run into previously, because the cold damage he has drains stamina and makes it pretty hard to fight him as a melee character. So I start off trying to get a couple of useful potions at the start of the fight, hit him with the Mark for Death, and then go in with the Silver Battle Staff because it seemed pretty good previously. But my miscalculation here is the Fire Enchant is actually pretty useless because he's got a Frost Cloak ability which ups his fire resist, so I'm just basically doing no damage at all, and then my stamina gets drained and it's all pretty quickly downhill from there as I'm suddenly doing no damage whatsoever. And around this point I realize there's not a chance that I'm gonna win this fight. So I reload and come back a little bit better prepared, this time with Skooma, to get a nice boost both to my damage and to my stamina, and I decided to just go with straight physical damage using Volendrung, and as you can see, this works much better. I'm able to break him down before he can really get off any effective spells at all. It ends up being one of the fastest fights that I had, and I'll just thank Skooma for that, even though it did kill me once, which I didn't record. After watching some gameplay footage, what's the takeaway from all that? Well, first, it's pretty obvious that Dragon Priests were heavily buffed in 3.3. They are no longer a pushover enemy that could just be chopped down with an axe very fast. Now they are a more significant fight, which I would say is for the best, since they're one of the more iconic enemies in Skyrim. Also, I can tell from the fights that the resistance level to different elements and different types of attacks appears to vary between the Dragon Priests, and to fight them you do need to have very high sustained DPS, and it does help to have some fire damage in there. I think it reduces their regeneration slightly, although that's not as applicable against enemies that use Frost. And finally, if you're a melee character, Skooma is highly recommended. It makes the fights a lot easier. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on the newly buffed Dragon Priest in 3.3, and so leave me any comments you have and hit subscribe if you're enjoying this type of content and would like notifications of my new videos, and I'll see you in the next one.